you talk in the book about how you yourself took a journey from atheism to practicing faith. What was that
Hmm.
journey like for you, and some of the tensions that resulted from that?
Well, it was a journey that I proceeded kicking and screaming because it was not what I thought would be part of my life
Mm,
journey. But I was raised in a home where faith wasn't considered relevant. So I had no real foundation to rest upon. And by the time I got to college and then to graduate school, I just didn't see any point to that at all. So I went from agnosticism to atheism, thought that anybody was talking about something that couldn't be measured in scientific experiments. It just isn't worth the time. So I would have been pretty rude to anyone who wanted to have a conversation about God.
mm,
But then I got a change of heart about what kind of science I wanted to do. I discovered that there were some really interesting things happening in life science that I kind of ignored. And with a rather large change in my professional pathway, decided to go to medical school. I entered medical school as an atheist.
mm,
I left as a Christian.
mm,
And it was the experience of sitting at the bedside of good, honorable North Carolina people who were facing the end of their lives, where I knew our medical interventions were not going to save them, and trying to imagine how I would handle
mm,
that, and observing that those who had a strong faith seemed to be oddly peaceful, that I knew I would not be. And then I got challenged by one of my
mm,
patients. On a particular afternoon, an elderly woman with really terrible heart disease, praying about the chest pain that she was experiencing, and then turning to me and asking, "Doctor, what do you believe?" Those four words, "What do you believe?" Even now, 47 years later,
mm,
that's the most important question I've ever been
mm.
asked. People listening to this, how would you answer that? And are you sure you've done the appropriate work to defend your answer? So I thought at the time I should say I don't believe any of it, but suddenly felt very thin in the face of this person whose whole life had been built upon her faith. For me to just say, well, I don't believe any of it, it wasn't just impolite. It suddenly made me feel like I have really skipped over putting any time into this. It would be dishonorable to say I have an answer when I haven't actually even started to ask the question. So that made me really uncomfortable.
Mm.
And I decided I need a stronger support for my atheism. I better look into this. I better read some stuff by atheists and then maybe read some stuff about people who don't agree with that and see who's got the better argument. And I started down that road and I ran into the writings of one C.S. Lewis, the Oxford scholar from several decades earlier, who had also been an atheist and had a lot of those same questions. And over the course of time, to his shock, became, as he described it, the most reluctant convert in all England, becoming a Christian on the basis of not purely logical arguments, but a lot of it was right in that place. I thought, wow, that's possible? So, yeah, with a lot of resistance on my part, because that was not the answer I wanted, I did begin to recognize that science itself had put in front of me all kinds of things that you could consider to be evidence for a creator. The Big Bang. The fact that the mathematics that I so loved as a student studying quantum mechanics actually work to describe matter and energy. Why should that be? The idea that if you're a physicist and you're trying to discover a law about matter and energy, you know you got it right when the equation is simple and beautiful.
Mm.
Why should that be? Ooh. And then we have this universe that's not just simple mathematically, but it has these constants that determine how those laws are going to work, like the gravitational constant. And if those are off by a tiny bit, like 1 part in 1 billion, the universe really doesn't work anymore as a place where anything interesting could happen. You're just going to have a lot of particles flying around and no complexity, which is pretty much necessary for any form you can imagine of life. Wait a minute, who set those particular constants to be exactly what they had to be? So either you got to say there's an intelligence behind this, or you have to say there's an infinite number of other parallel universes that we can never actually measure or observe, and we just happen to be in the lucky one. Which of those required more faith? The creator God started to emerge as a pretty compelling option. But then I had to figure out, is this a God, a deist kind of God who set the whole thing in motion and then had something else to do? Or does this God care about me? Francis Collins? Really? Now, how can that be? Here's where C.S. Lewis got me in that very first chapter of his book, Mere Christianity. The title of that chapter is Right and Wrong as a Clue to the Meaning of the Universe. What? I never really thought about that. I took for granted that there is such a thing as right and wrong. All of us do. And I also took for granted that I'm supposed to do the right thing. And I had to admit that oftentimes I didn't. But when I didn't, I made an excuse, which only proved that I actually believed I was supposed to do the right thing. Where does that come from? Evolution doesn't quite work. If you say this is all evolutionary wiring of our brains because it's helped us survive, then you have to come to the conclusion we've basically been hoodwinked. There's really no such thing as good and evil. I don't know any atheist who's really comfortable going to that level. It seems like there's something real here. And if it's real, and if I'm looking for a clue about a God who is not just the creator of the universe, but who cares about me, wow, here it is, right in my own heart. That got me. The other thing that got me was beauty, Lee, because for me, this rather, hard-edged guy about show me your data or I'm not interested in your conclusion, I would occasionally encounter these moments where I was lifted out of all of that by an experience of beauty, which for me was often music, giving you this strange sweetness, but also aching, some sort of longing for something beautiful that you couldn't quite put into words, and you wanted to have more of it, but it never lasted very long. What is that? A longing for something that maybe we're made for, but we haven't gotten there yet. So you put those together, the moral law and the appealing of beauty, and I couldn't explain either of those without having some larger significance of who the creator was. Then, of course, I had to figure out which faith that was going to lead me to, and I did a lot of that exploring through various world religions. And I almost hoped the answer wouldn't be Christianity, because it seemed like that would be the obvious one for a guy in the United States where that is still the most common religion. But then I met the person of Jesus, who I had assumed was a myth. And the more I learned, the more I realized this is what was missing. I was beginning to perceive a holy God. I was certainly perceiving increasingly an unholy Francis Collins. How were these ever going to get together? And there was the answer, in a way that no other religions really quite offered, who claimed not just to be a smart guy with a lot of wonderful teachings, but to be the Son of God, and who died on the cross in a way that provided that opportunity for me to have relationship with God. That's what I needed. And after 2 years of that long struggle, I could no longer resist. I couldn't prove that this was all true, but it became for me much more compelling than any of the alternatives. I couldn't look back because the ground behind me had already crumbled. I had to take a leap forward.